we got to, we got to Moscow, and uh, everybody joked about the rooms because there were so many air vents or whatever. There were like, I think 11 air vents, and the room was tiny. The room was like a Manhattan hotel room in size, very, very small. So we had some characters on our tour. So one of the people on our tour who was a judge, he made a speech in every room that he went to and said, I'm Judge so and so from the, and I want you to know I know you're going to be listening to me anyway,
Oh
because
gosh.
I mean, the rooms, we figured pretty much that they'd be bugged.
Welcome to the Where Have You Been podcast. I'm your host, Bill Ream, and each week on the pod, I have conversations with incredible guests from all walks of life. Expect to hear funny, crazy, emotional, life-changing, and even sometimes life-threatening stories and experiences that will entertain and inspire you. As always, I appreciate your likes, subscriptions, ratings, and reviews wherever you are listening. It doesn't sound like much, but it truly helps the pod get to the ears of more people who may enjoy it. And check out the website, whybpodcast.com, for links to the socials where you can find pictures from the guests and their stories, and also buy merch if you're so inclined. Now let's get to this week's episode. Thank you for being here. And today I'm really excited to have a really special guest with us, I think I'm okay to say a very accomplished children's author, among other things. Today I have Barbara with us on the Where Have You Been podcast. Barbara, if you won't mind telling everyone, who are you?
Okay, well, I'm a pretty down-to-earth person who loves to read, loves history, and loves to travel. As a child, I wasn't given too much opportunity to travel. My parents didn't have a car, and although we live in Queens, in one of the boroughs of New York City, we had to take public transportation to get anywhere. So we didn't go too far afoot. But I was always into history. I always wanted to know how the explorers got to where they were going, and the experiences that they had along the way. And I always wanted to travel. So as soon as I was an adult and able to get out there on my own, I started traveling. And first, I didn't travel too far afoot. I think my very first trip was a trip to Miami with girlfriends for just a few days. And then I did travel to Puerto Rico for a 1 week trip. But I really, really wanted to go to Europe, and I wanted to experience
Yeah.
some of the ancient history that I had studied. So I went
Oh,
to Europe. I went to
hold on.
a
Barbara,
Mediterranean cruise. Mhm.
before we get too far into that, I do want to, if you don't mind, I want to let people know not just who you are as far as your travel background, but so let's tell everyone you're an author, correct? And do you have other background? Were you a teacher before, or are
Yes,
you still as well?
I am an author. My academic background is in history, so I have graduate and undergraduate degrees in history. But as far as my career goes, I went a different way. I didn't stay into the academic frame with my history as far as the research went. I decided I wanted to work with kids because I was very much a people person. So I started teaching. I started teaching at 20, and that wound up to be a 40-year career in education.
Wow.
And along the way, I took many twists and turns as I found that children weren't really being able to meet their full potential. I switched from one area to the another. So I started out working with the general population of kids, and then I went into special education, and I worked with children with special needs. very intense special needs, physical needs, autism, a Fragile X syndrome, that type of thing. Then I became the director of a special ed school, working one-on-one with special needs kids, eventually becoming a district administrator and finding services for kids that had special needs. So when I did finally retire, I wanted to put my two passions together. So I combined my love of history with my teaching experience. And I now provide parents with tools and strategies to help kids become happy, successful, confident, and I hope good critical thinkers and leaders of tomorrow. So my books are nonfiction, and a lot of them are based on travel because I visit historical sites, and using a cartoon character, I create very interactive experiences for kids, not only to learn about history, but to also interact and express their own thoughts and hopefully become problem solvers, to use that history that we learned about to create a better legacy for the future. So that's my book series.
That's wonderful.
Published 17 books so far.
Wow.
That does involve some travel because we travel to the historic sites. My husband, who's also my illustrator, does the photography and also does the physical illustration and graphics for the books. So that's what I started out doing. And since the book series, I've also expanded to do other things and provide other resources for parents and teachers. So I have a blog, I review books, I provide them with curriculum resources, I give them tips and advice as far as raising successful and happy kids. So that's pretty much what I am doing now in addition to my travel.
Is that all?
No, right.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
lot.
that's
It is.
wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your, for doing what you did for so long and what you're still doing to help children. I think it's so important. And if I read correctly, your books are not just great reads for the kids, but they're award winning. Am I right?
Yes, I've won more than a half a dozen various awards for the books in various categories. Some of them for independent reading books. Some of them are, based on parent awards or principal awards, and some of them for the design and the graphics as well. So a lot of parents and teachers like to use the books as a stepping stone or a preparation to actually going and visiting the sites themselves.
Oh,
So
that's really
they
cool.
read the book together and they discuss the book, they talk about what they're going to see and how they're going to apply what they see on their visit. So that's also very gratifying because if at all possible, I would love all of the kids who read my books to have the benefit of actually going and absorbing and taking in
Yeah,
the
firsthand.
experience as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. That's really, really cool. So, where can, if anyone's interested in checking out your book series or anything else that you have going on, where can people find you?
Well, my website is simply the name of my character. It's www.littlemisshistory.com. And from my website, they can read about the books, they can find out where to obtain the books, they can connect to my blog and get the resources on my blog. They can connect to my YouTube channel and get my videos on the YouTube channel. And they can go to collect the resources on my Pinterest board or any of my social media sites. So that's kind of like a one-stop
Yeah,
clickable resource.
you're all over the place. That's great.
But I try to
So,
make it easy to find me. So,
yeah, that's good. So there is no where in the world is Barbara? How do I pronounce your last name? Mojica?
Mojica, right.
Mojica. Where in the world is Barbara Mojica? We know where to find you, so that's good.
That's right. Just go to Little Miss History and there you go.
Yeah. So you mentioned that when you were younger, mom and dad really didn't contribute to travel. They really didn't do much traveling. So, but you had an interest kind of right away. And so when you had the chance to do so, you kind of took advantage of that. So we might as well kind of just get started. You kind of already did a little bit. So if you'd like to continue where we left off, Barbara, where have you been?
Okay, so my first big trip was to the ancient world. As I mentioned, I went on a cruise to the Greek Isles and then to Rome, and that was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that.
And those were the
Went
first
to,
two places, by the way, that I went to that were outside of the United States was Greece and Italy, Rome and Santorini and Athens. So
yes,
yeah,
Santorini.
and they were
That was an
beautiful.
experience. I don't know
Absolutely.
how long ago you went to Santorini. When I went there, they didn't have any way to get up to Santorini except with the donkeys.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Which they still
And that was
do, but
quite the experience. Yeah.
yeah.
I thought they were supposed to be so sure-footed, but
No.
the one that I was on kept stumbling.
Oh, but you made it. You're here, so
I made it. I went to the islands like Delos and Mykonos, and I had actually taken a summer, a very fast, intensive summer of ancient Greek, 6 weeks of ancient Greek. So while I was there, I was actually able to read a couple of things, and that was fun. Of course, I no longer would be able to do that because that is long
yeah.
since gone out of my very, very intensive trying to remember all the characters and so on. But it was a fun, fun trip. And I remember being in Rome and entering Rome at night and really just um, overcome with emotion because I was actually seeing what I had spent so many years studying, and it became so real, So
Yeah.
an intensive experience of
Well,
almost,
and consider this was, if I'm correct, this was back in the early 1970s.
yes,
So this was before you could read about these things, of course you did, but there was no internet like there is today. There was no Netflix or YouTube like there is today.
no,
So
no.
it probably was much more impactful for you then than it would be necessarily for someone today because we kind of feel like we know a lot more now than we did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that you're correct, definitely. And that was my first taste of Europe, and after that, I wanted to go back and do more. Um, so I did. So the year after that trip to Italy and Greece, I went on a crazy, it was an American Express tour, and it was 30 days, and I believe it was 23 countries
Oh my gosh.
in 30 days. So I call that if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. That was my if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium trip because you were literally living out of suitcase.
That's a whirlwind.
Yeah, moving from, and to be honest with you, the guide was not all that great. We were very disappointed with the guide, but we visited so many countries. I mean, the countries that you would imagine would be on a European tour of any great length, plus, little places like Luxembourg and Liechtenstein. You would have lunch in one place and then get back on the tour bus and you would wind up in a different country at night. So we visited Belgium, we visited the Netherlands, we visited, of course, London and France. France, we were able to visit the city, of course, Paris, but we also went to the countryside. So we were able to go to beautiful places like Avignon and little tiny towns. We went throughout Italy, we went to Pisa and back to Rome again for a day, but then we went to Bologna and um, smaller towns in Italy as well. So it was nice. I mean, we saw a lot, but it wasn't memorable in the sense that you didn't have the time to really take things in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you was something that fast. Well, first of all, did you go by yourself or did you have like a friend or family member with you or
I went with my husband at the time.
okay.
Um,
So,
the two of us, it was on a tour, like I guess traditionally in the 70s and the 80s, that was probably the most common way to travel to Europe on one of these organized tours,
mhm,
which involved flying to one of the major cities like London or Paris, where you would start the tour and then you would get on a motor coach and you would drive during the day on the motor coach and usually stop someplace for lunch. And then at night you would get to the point where you would stay. But we really didn't stay any place more than there were one or two of the major points where we stayed maybe 2 days, but otherwise it was like really crazy.
so
But
it's really
again,
yeah,
the difference was that not as many people were traveling as is the case today, and touring was clearly not as widespread, so you didn't have the crowds that you have today.
sure. But it's also
And
hard
you,
to create like true memories, like memorable experiences, I guess, when it's
right.
something that fast. Like you said, sightseeing, really.
And the air travel wasn't nearly as complicated as it is today. Of course, there was no TSA and the security. I remember when we went to Italy the first time, there was nobody there when we got to customs because everybody was at lunch and we had to wait for them to come back from lunch. And then they didn't even open our suitcases to check anything. They just put a chalk mark to show that we had gone through customs. So it was very, very different experience from today as far as the getting there and the moving about. But that was my second experience. My third experience was the one that was really, really memorable because I discovered that there was a new tour available to go to the Soviet Union. And it was the first time that the communist bloc was opening up travel to the West.
Wow. So, and you were excited for that. Some people may have been nervous.
I said, oh, this is going to be great.
That's awesome.
So I signed myself up for that tour. I went on that tour again with my first husband. And that was a really wild experience because we were going to visit Poland, which was part of the communist bloc then. We were going to visit Czechoslovakia. We were going to visit Hungary. And we were going to go to Russia, to Moscow and Leningrad, and East and West Berlin.
That's incredible. Wow. Especially again, you're talking mid 70s.
This was 1974.
Okay. You have to have some really interesting stories from that trip.
Yes.
Please
First,
share. I'm excited
the
to hear.
first thing was we had like no idea. They had agreed to do this tour company because there was no way that you were going to be traveling independently on your own.
Sure.
So this was done through a tour company, but the tour company advertised the trip with the proviso that the entire trip was subject to government approval and that things could be changed at any time,
So like even your itinerary, once you got there,
even
everything could
your
be altered.
itinerary
Okay.
or your hotel, or they could add something or they could take something away.
They could probably terminate it if they wanted to, right?
Well, I guess they would have, I guess they theoretically could have, but then they would have probably had to give your money back or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. The interesting thing was this was through Globus Tours, which is still in existence today. The tour director, I couldn't believe when we met her. She was only 26 years old, and she was the daughter of a Dutch sea captain. But she was so confident after having that other tour guide on the 30-day tour, that was pretty
Hmm.
bad. This woman was on the ball.
That's
So
good.
she could handle anything. So I felt pretty confident when I met her, but we were all excited. And the tour, we had I think about 35 people on the tour, and they were from all over the place. We had younger people, we had a couple of retired people, we had a judge from Kansas, we had people from New Jersey, people from New York City, and there were some people from the middle of the country as well. So it was a nice mix of different types of people from different professions. There was a doctor, there was a musician. So, there were people from uh, all over the place and all different backgrounds. So first thing is we were going to be flying to Poland first. So we flew to Poland and on the Polish airline, Blot Airlines, and we landed in Poland. And we got off the airplane and we were going to the hotel when the tour guide discovered that half of us had the wrong visa.
Oh,
Of course, I was in the half that had the wrong visa.
oh no.
So our first our first tour experience was to go to the Polish embassy
Mm,
and for her to straighten it out and figure out why they had given us the wrong kind of stamp on the visa and why it was the wrong visa. So after we got that straightened out, we got back to the hotel, and the hotel was very close to the main square in Warsaw, and we could watch the changing of the guard from the hotel room. So they were all doing, the kind of the goose step march and changing of the guard every hour, which was interesting. Plenty of soldiers all around. And Poland well, of course, Warsaw was the capital, and it was pretty well populated, but there was not too much economic or consumer activity. There were some stores, but not too much in the stores. And the city was pretty, I don't know how you could gray or
hmm.
not very colorful, not very lively.
Hmm.
So
Sort of
we went
drab.
on
Yeah.
and we to Moscow. That was going to be the next stop. So we went to Moscow on a plane that looked like it was from the 1950s. It was this old propeller plane,
Hmm.
Aeroflot. The airport you really wouldn't call it much of an airport. There was no terminal building. You had to walk out on the tarmac and walk across
Hmm.
and up the
Sure.
stairs to get onto the airplane. But before you got on the airplane, you had to be checked out again. So even though, you would figure you go through customs, well, there was no customs. There was a soldier standing at the foot of the staircase who checked the passport and looked at you and then checked the passport and then looked at you again and checked the passport. And finally, they let you get on the plane. But then when you got on the plane, you were told more than one time not to take any photographs.
Oh,
And
wow.
if you took photographs, your camera would be confiscated and you would have to pay some kind of penalty, which they really didn't explain. So people didn't take photographs. So I was more worried about the plane landing than anything else because it didn't sound too good.
And that was when they said that, that was when you were leaving Poland. You hadn't gotten to Moscow yet. Is that right?
Right,
Wow.
right. Well, we got to Moscow, and uh, everybody joked about the rooms because there were so many air vents or whatever. There were like, I think, 11 air vents, and the room was tiny. The room was like a Manhattan hotel room in size, very, very small. So we had some characters on our tour. So one of the people on our tour who was a judge, he made a speech in every room that he went to and said, I'm Judge so and so from the, and I want you to know I know you're going to be listening to me anyway,
Oh
because
gosh.
I mean, the rooms, we figured pretty much that they'd be bugged.
Wow.
They didn't have a check-in desk to check in the lobby. This was called a tourist hotel because anyone who visited Russia um, had to stay in one of these tourist hotels. So the tourist hotels would have people from very few from the United States because we were pretty much at the beginning of touring with the United States, but there were lots of tourists from Korea and Japan, especially.
But nobody, if you were local to Russia, you would not stay in this hotel.
No, you would not stay in this hotel. And
Wow.
they had what they called chamber women who were on every floor of the hotel. When you went out, you had to hand them your key. They had these huge keys, which looked like giant skeleton keys. And when you left your room and you were leaving the hotel, you had to hand in your key and they would give it back to you when you returned. But you had to be back like Cinderella before midnight
Oh my gosh.
because if you came back after midnight, they would send somebody out looking for you.
Are you
You were
kidding?
not
Would they
allowed
really
to
do
roam.
that?
They really, yeah, they were.
Oh my gosh. Do you think though, while you were gone, like them having the keys, do you think that was so they could go in the room while you were gone? Am I being,
Yeah, possibly. I think it was more of a thing that they just wanted to keep track of you, but yeah, they could go in the room
oh my
as
gosh.
well. And as far as what we saw, well, we were supposed to go to one of their big museums. Okay, so this was supposed to be a museum of Russian culture, but there wasn't very much in it. And when we got to the museum, they made us take off our shoes. That was the first thing we had to do. And put on these fuzzy slippers that look like mops. They look just like mops. That what they were having us do was clean the floors of the museum while we were walking around because they really had no staff.
That's
And the
unbelievable.
museum had these huge chandeliers that were made out of glass, but they only had one light bulb in each one. So you had this big glass chandelier with one light bulb.
Wow.
So it was very, very strange. And as we drove around, they would tell us we're going to visit GUM, which what GUM was supposed to be their big department store. And they made a big deal out of it, like it was such a wonderful store. They made it sound like it was a Bergdorf Goodman or something. But in reality, when we got there, it was really like a giant flea market. They had different stalls or compartments.
Hmm.
In each one of those compartments, there were people selling things like you would see when you went to a flea market. But the consumer economy in Russia was so poor that people generally had to save a very long time to buy anything significant. So they gave us an example of a car. So there were not a lot of cars on the road when we were driving on this tour bus. And we found out that for the average person had to save about 6 years to get enough money to buy a car.
6 years? I thought you were going to say 6 months.
No, 6 years. And
Oh
the
my
gas
gosh.
stations were few and very far between. I mean, they were 50 miles apart
Oh my gosh.
in the populated areas, and in the rural areas they were like nowhere at all to be seen.
Wow.
So, and people, they didn't have supermarkets. So when people wanted to buy food, you would see all of these little lines all over the place with what looked like, almost like a food stand at a food market, farmer's market
Hmm.
here in the States in the summer. And you would see people on one line buying tomatoes, and people had to go to another line to buy cucumbers. There was no centralized food supply. You had to go different places to get what you wanted or what you needed. It was bizarre. All of their money at that time, of course, was going toward industrial production
Mm.
and military production. So there was very little going into the consumer economy. So between that, we were wondering how we would fare. So we asked the tour guide, who was the local guide in Russia, about different professions, and certain professions were very highly valued in Russia. So if I had been living in Russia, I would have been of a pretty good high status because teachers were very highly valued.
Hmm.
Engineers were very highly valued. Anybody who was in science
Sure.
or industry was considered valuable to them. But we did go to a few other places. Oh, they had a raffle, and they said that they had a few tickets to the Moscow Circus,
Oh,
but they
wow.
didn't have enough tickets for the whole tour. So they had a raffle, and my husband and I won two of the four tickets to the Moscow Circus.
Wow.
So we get to the Moscow Circus, which was just a big. It was almost like the Big Apple Circus kind of concept.
Hmm.
There was one central ring, and it was kind of like not a circus tent. It was a more of a permanent structure, but not
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
something that wasn't movable.
Okay.
And they had all of these rings and wires going down the aisles. Well, when we got there, we had the two tickets, and of course we couldn't read them because they were in Russian, whatever. But so we got directed to our seats, and I was on one side, and my husband was all the way on the other side. So I was trying to tell this, matron, whatever, I want to go over there, sit over there. And she kept yelling at me, not yet, not yet, not yet. No, sit, sit, sit. So I finally gave up. I just sat there next to some other people that I didn't know who spoke only Russian. And uh, we got through it. We got through the circus and then went back to the hotel.
Was it at
You
least
know,
enjoyable? Like, was it at least
It
fun?
was, it was, I mean, it was, but it was, again, the entertainment was not up to the modern era. So
Hmm.
the entertainment was quite a few years behind. One of the places they took us in Poland they took us to this building that it looked like a wedding cake type of building. It was strange. It had like the outside of the building had different layers to it. And it was they said it was one of their nighttime clubs.
Okay.
So they took us in there, and we sat at a long table. We were always together whenever we went out, and like they never would let you really mingle. So there were people there that were native, that were Polish, but we were isolated at our table. So the guide came over, and he said, "Now you drink like Polish person." So they gave us these shot glasses with 100 proof vodka that could nearly knock you off your
Oh my
feet.
gosh.
And then we had the show. So the show was kind of like the Ed Sullivan show. It was really wild.
Like a variety
They
show.
had but they had a bear dancing, and then they had a singer, and then they had some women that were dancers, and then they had some kind of circus acts like hula hoop things, and
Yeah.
it was all like one big mishmash of things, and that was their nightclub entertainment. So,
That's fun.
those we went to Leningrad. Of course, we saw the Winter Palace, we saw the Summer Palace, and those kind of highlights we were able to see. When we were driving, we had to cross all the borders in each country. Well, they all had very strict security, but each country had their own set of people, so their own military and so on. When we went across the border, we were supposed to go through customs, but they really couldn't. They really didn't have the time or the people to go through all of our luggage because all of our luggage was at the bottom of the bus wherever
Sure.
we went.
Hmm.
So they would pick a couple of suitcases and then they would go through those suitcases and then put the rest of them back. And I had a crazy bright pink suitcase, which everybody kept saying, "Oh, your suitcase is going to get picked every time because it stands out." My suitcase never got picked.
Wow.
My suitcase was never opened, throughout the trip for the random tests. But they would come on the bus.
Hmm.
So in Czechoslovakia, this young soldier who must have been, he looked like he was about 16, but I guess he was probably 18. And he was dressed with in the military looking fatigues with a rifle, 9 yards. And he got on the bus and he went through all of the top racks, how the buses have the
Yeah, like the overhead.
rack on the top. He kept, he was just looking at things to see what people had. And he picked up a paper rolled up poster. We collected a few things. There wasn't much to buy, really. Usually you buy souvenirs along. Well, there wasn't really much to buy along the way anywhere.
Hmm.
So we didn't have all of that much, but we had bought this poster, paper poster, and he picked it up and he said, "What's this?" He didn't speak much English. And somebody said to him, "That's a poster." And he got all excited. He got red in the face. And he said, "Poster, poster, poster." Because it turns out it meant something like military man in his
Oh
language.
gosh.
And that's what he thought it was. So he opened it up, and then, of course, he saw it wasn't. So, but that was a bit of a close call there. When we went to Hungary, we went to in Czechoslovakia. We went to Wenceslas Square,
Oh yeah,
and
Wenceslas. Yeah, Wenceslas
they
Square.
have they have a beautiful square with a church and a clock tower.
I've been there more recently, but I've been there a couple of times. It's beautiful.
And we look up and we saw a young man on the clock tower, right, like hanging almost off the clock, taking pictures of us.
Oh my gosh.
So we're looking, saying, "What is he doing?" So then we started waving at him, which made him very nervous. But he continued to take pictures of us for a while. And we're like, okay, so somebody's watching us. But it was beautiful. The countryside was beautiful. Budapest was beautiful, the two sides of the river, and the food was not good.
The food in
Um,
Budapest, particularly?
in general, the food was not good.
Oh, no.
The biggest joke was it was in Moscow. We ate at we got there and we ate at the hotel. Most of the time we ate in the hotels, unless it was someplace that they were taking us where there would be some government run place where they could take us to eat because
Yeah,
they
and
weren't going to
they
allow
told
us to
you
wander.
where you could eat, right? They told you where you were eating. You didn't get to choose.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, you couldn't go off on your own, pretty much. So we ate at this hotel, and there was no choice of the menu, no choice at all. So they bring out the dinner, and everybody looks at each other's plate because they were identical. I mean, everybody had a tiny piece of meat, which was maybe 2 ounces,
Mm.
and then they had a little tiny potato, and every single one of us on the tour had exactly 6 peas on the plate.
6 peas. Six.
Six tiny peas. They were counted out exact.
Oh my gosh.
Each one of us had exactly the same amount. And the food, like
I feel like just by that description, I just imagine it being bland.
it was bland. And well, sometimes we couldn't figure out what it was, actually.
Oh, no.
I don't know what that meat was. What somebody on the tour said, "Oh, it tastes like horse meat." I don't know whether he was serious or kidding around.
Gosh,
I
I
mean,
guess
it
it could
didn't
have
taste
been.
awful. Like it wasn't that it was bad,
It just
you
wasn't
know,
good.
but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. The
Oh
only
gosh.
place the food was halfway decent was in Germany. When we were in Germany, they took us to both East and West Berlin, and we went through Checkpoint Charlie. That's another story. But when we were in West Berlin, and the food was pretty good. Were pretty much we were on the street, the main street in Berlin, which was considered like their Fifth Avenue street, the main street. And that had all been rebuilt after the war. But it was directly adjacent to East Berlin. You could actually look and see the rooms of East Berlin right over there. And you could see the bombed out church. You could see, pieces of rubble still in the streets. And not far from there was Checkpoint Charlie. And when we left to go home, we were going to be flying home from Poland again. But in order to get to the airport, we had to go through East Berlin.
Okay.
We weren't flying out from West Berlin. We were flying out from East Berlin. So we had to go through Checkpoint Charlie. So that was another experience on the trip. So the day that we were leaving, we got on the bus and we're on the bus and we got our luggage and everything. And we went through a main gate because it seemed to me that they brought all the tourists through this one opening. So we're sitting there and we're sitting there and we're sitting there and the guard is in the little guardhouse and he's not doing anything. Like the bus driver's waiting and nobody's coming.
And he's not down
No,
there looking at his cell phone because this is in the
no,
70s, but he's just sitting.
just sitting there, So the bus driver got a little annoyed. The tour guide got annoyed. She kept going out, and the bus driver kept going out, and nothing was happening. Meantime, everybody else is going through. So they had allowed enough time for, and of course, there was no hassle at airports with TSA and any of that kind of stuff.
No, but you
So
still have to get there on
finally,
time.
yeah, we still had to get there on time. So what happened was they let a French group go through. They let other people go through. They had us sit there, sit there, sit there. Finally, at the last minute, with just enough time to spare for us to get there and get on the plane, they let us go through. But we were getting annoyed. So, since this was our last day, and we were feeling pretty brave at this point, we're leaving. So, we all started to annoy them. So, we started singing every American patriotic song
Oh my
we
God.
could think of. So we started singing Yankee Doodle Dandy. We sang God Bless America. We sang My Country.
Oh my gosh.
They were really getting annoyed. For whatever reason, they did finally let us go in time to catch the plane. And we did leave and we did get out there, but there were other experiences. I mean, they had warned us not to trade with anyone because at the time a lot of people in Russia were trying to get a hold of Western consumer goods.
Oh, sure. I'm sure if you had blue jeans or something, it would have been worth.
Exactly. And somebody did stop us and ask my husband if he had any jeans.
Wow.
They wanted records, vinyl records,
Hmm.
but they really wanted things like Beatles songs,
Because
or
they couldn't get them there, right?
they could not get anything like that. They couldn't
So
get jeans.
crazy.
They could, I mean, they would have to save an awful long time to buy anything that would be considered a Western novelty or
Mm,
luxury item.
yeah.
It just wasn't available. But they had warned us that if you give them anything like that, if you sell them anything, or even if you give them anything, it's a mandatory 6 months in prison if you get
Oh
caught,
my
and we can't
gosh.
really do anything to help you. So, luckily, our tour, um, we didn't have anything. But people did try. They approached you,
Isn't that
if they
it's just
saw you.
amazing to think that there was a time that a government like that would. It wasn't just they wanted the things because they couldn't afford to buy them. They were not even allowed to own them. That's just insane to me.
No, it was just total control. I mean, from the food supply to the consumer goods to we weren't really allowed a lot to interact with people. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, in the daytime and you weren't going to a specific place. There were times when we had like some time you could walk around in the daytime, but there wasn't really an ability to interact a lot with people because most of the people in the daytime would be at work, you know,
Yeah, and even if you did, they
going to the
probably wouldn't speak
market.
English. So,
Yeah, and not many of them did speak English. Or even though, like most of Europe, for the people that were educated, English was pretty much a second language.
mhm.
So the more educated people might have spoken English. But there weren't a lot of tourists walking around because this was all very new. They had just started to do this. And as I said, most of the tourists were Asians that spoke Japanese or Korean. So most of the native population probably wasn't able to interact with them much,
Yeah.
anyway. But it was a really unique experience. And after that trip, I pretty much gave up traveling for a while, was started to think about raising a family. So a couple of years after that, I had my children. And from then on, it was more of the traditional
Family
Disney
vacation. Yeah, yeah.
and the beach and the mountains and national parks, that kind of thing. So I didn't start traveling again until my kids were older. And my other big adventure was China.
Okay. And I absolutely am so intrigued by what anything that happened in China. But I want to ask you, just because, incredible things can happen and incredible experiences can happen even just with your family and your kids. And, is there anything that, you know, maybe when you're sitting around with your family and you're reminiscing about your little family trips that you took, are there stories that you love to tell? Is there anything that stood out to you during that time when the kids were growing up that was like, I'll never forget this?
Well, I never forget getting trapped in the airport for 12 hours
Uh,
on Easter break. We had taken the kids to Disney in Orlando for Easter, and there was a big snafu at the airport. And I guess they probably overbooked the planes, and we got trapped in an airport. And it was one of those airports um, where, they have the commuter line, and once you leave the one part of the terminal, you're kind of out there in the middle of nowhere.
mm-hmm.
So we were like out there in the middle of nowhere uh, before they figured out that there was going to be this big plane delay. Two very cranky young kids with no food um,
Oh
for
yeah, and the,
10
and the
hours.
concourses probably weren't even notwithstanding the fact that you were out there in that little part. They didn't probably have all the same restaurants and everything like
No,
they
they
do
wouldn't have,
today.
but like it was really bad where we were.
No.
I mean, the other bad travel experience I had was not with the kids. This was before I had kids. Went to Mexico and we went to Taxco and we went to Mexico City and we went to Acapulco. But they stopped in this little town near Taxco, and there was a beach, and we were there for a day. We were sitting on the beach, and I got attacked by sand fleas. I never, ever was I so miserable. They were unbelievable. I had bumps all over me
Oh my
from my
gosh.
feet all the way up to my legs. And they came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, these things were all over me. And the next day, I had giant bumps all over me.
Oh, I'm getting itchy now. I'm
Yeah,
getting
that was
itchy.
that was a pretty horrible experience. I
Oh,
mean, yeah, that most of the time we had pretty good luck with traveling with the kids. We didn't, have any catastrophes like major car breakdowns or
yeah. No, that's good. That's good. But you said so you went to communist China. That had to be interesting and incredible.
well, that tour was a lot better organized. I was at the time I was still teaching, and I discovered, 'cause I was always looking, I was always on the lookout for any kind of unusual
Mm-hmm.
experience. And I was looking in a teachers union paper, and I saw an ad that a high school teacher in a school that was not too far from where I was living was going to run a trip to Beijing, travel to, to Beijing and some other places in China. And
And
it
this
was
was about 20 years
open.
ago.
This was in 2004.
Yeah. Okay.
So I said, this sounds like a good experience. And since he was originally from Shanghai and spoke Chinese, I said, oh, this will really be good. So it was not awfully expensive. It sounded like a really good opportunity. So I booked the trip. and it was going to be like 16 days and 14 nights. And he was going to arrange the trip and be with us the whole time, but there were also going to be local guides in each of the places that we visited.
Very cool.
So took the trip, and a real cultural shock experience again. First thing that happened was there was a pile up at JFK waiting for planes to take off because for some weird reason, the planes that fly to China fly on the same schedule as all the planes that go to Europe. So between 5 and 7 at night, it's chaos, trying to get out. They said, oh, there'll be a slight delay. So we had already left the terminal and they didn't tell us until afterwards. And once you leave the terminal, they're not allowed to serve you anything but water.
Yeah, until you get in the air, right?
Until you get in the air. So 3 hour delay till we took off. And then it was a 12-hour nonstop flight from New York City to Beijing. So we were on the plane for 15 hours.
I mean, at least thank goodness it was nonstop. So, but yeah, that's a long time.
It is a long time, but it was one of these jets that had I don't know, there had to be close to 500 people on the plane, the 9 seats across and different cabins and configurations. So they tried to keep us amused. They showed us Chinese kung fu, and then they showed us some Chinese cartoons. And then they did show one movie in English. This was Air China. And the thing that amused me the most was they had a giant screen up in the front, which they used for the movies. They didn't have the screens on the seats yet. And
Yeah.
they had the computer map with the airplane, and they had that all across the screen, so you could see exactly where you were at a given time. And they had this little airplane flying across, and they showed the whole map going all the way across the desert, and, first the ocean, and then going across. You flew all across Russia and into China. And that was really interesting because we flew over the North Pole.
Oh, wow.
And when you fly over the North Pole, the computer map goes crazy. So the little airplane that was flying, and you're watching this airplane flying, when you're over the North Pole, it's like spinning in all directions.
You're looking out the window, like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and then they're telling you, well, it's minus 72 degrees Fahrenheit outside the window. So, and I don't sleep very much when I'm on planes. I'm like, I got to see everything that's going on. So, this was a very, very long night for me, but we got there and we landed, and you land, and similar to with Russia, you're in the middle of nowhere. There's no, this was before the Olympics.
Okay.
So they were still prepping for the Olympics, and they still had a long way to go. So we landed in the middle of nowhere, and there was the traditional staircase that they pushed up to the plane, and you got off. But when you got off, they had buses for customs. You got into a bus. And then they drove and drove and drove until there was some kind of building. It was not a big airport building, but it was a building. And then you went through customs. Then we got to the hotel. Now, the hotel was not bad. The biggest problem everywhere, whether it be in the airport or a gas station or any place that they took you on a tour, was what kind of bathroom we were going to get. So they still were mostly on the Eastern toilet system. The airport, most of the bathrooms in the airport were Eastern toilet. The hotel, of course, was modern. but any place else you went, it was like hit and miss what you would get. So the first thing that we would ask when we got anywhere was Eastern toilet or Western, because Eastern is basically a hole in the
I was
ground.
just gonna say that it's just a hole in the floor, isn't it?
And we had, we had local tour guides in each place that we went. And one of the guides told she was from a middle class family, and she said uh, they were fortunate and they were able to get the Western toilet when she was not even a teenager. But most people didn't have the Western toilets, and when they got them or when they came across one, they didn't know what to do with them. So she said most of the people would stand on them
Oh my gosh.
and break them
Oh,
because they didn't know what to do with them. In most of the bathrooms had a common area for washing hands, so the men would come out or the women would come out, and then there'd be a common area or sometimes a curtain separating the two bathrooms and then the common area for washing hands. So that was one thing in China, but it was a wonderful experience in terms of seeing all of the local culture. And we went to an opera in Beijing. We went to a silk factory where they spun the silk. And we saw how it was woven. And we went to a factory where they hand made the rugs. But it was very disturbing to learn how they did that, because what they would do is they would go to the countryside and they would recruit young girls to do the weaving for the rugs, and they would
mhm.
train them how to do it. But they would not be able to do it for more than 8 or 10 years because their eyesight would go.
Oh my gosh.
And the reason that they went to the countryside is there were so many poorer people in the countryside, they would actually be willing to give up their child to send them because they would pay them money. And then, of course, the children would send it to their parents. The same thing with the children who were, whether they be dancers or whether they be gymnasts or talented in sports. Same thing. They would take the children away from the parents. They would send them to school for training. They would, provide for their whatever clothing and essentials they needed. They would send money back to the parents. And that's the way it is. We went to a jade factory. We saw how they carved the jade.
Wow.
We went to a factory where they collected the pearls from the oysters
That's
and
cool.
then made it into jewelry. So we really got to see a lot of the way the people lived, and how the E- Eastern culture was being gradually commercialized, into a way of support for them. So we learned a lot. We also went to a tea factory, and that was fascinating. We saw the tea growing on the hillsides and how they collected it and how they steeped it. And, then we sat there and we each had cups of the different types of teas that they were raising there in the countryside. We were able to drive through the country and see the people working in the fields, very much the way you would picture 100 years ago in China. I mean, they still wore the straw hats. They still plowed with hand plows and oxen or
Wow.
some other animal drawing the plow. And we went to the Lake District and we saw the area where there are the little lakes and canals. We pretty much, so we were able to, we had to fly from Beijing to Shanghai because the distance was just too great to cover by motor coach in any short period of time. It took 2.5 hours to fly from Beijing just to Shanghai.
Oh, wow.
And Shanghai is fascinating. Of course, that's their business district. And the river divides old Shanghai from new Shanghai. So you have old Shanghai on one side, and on the other side is new Shanghai with the skyscrapers and fireworks and all kinds of modern things
Hmm.
on the other side of the river. So we got to cruise down the river at night and see that. You find touches, I mean, I'm sure it's so much different now, 20 years later, but there was already a three-story McDonald's in Shanghai, and they sold a lot of the same things they sell here, but there were Asian touches. You know, there were also some Asian foods that they sold, but it was fun to see families there with, little babies and strollers and but huge because the population, I mean, walking in Manhattan is nothing compared to walking in Shanghai. Trying to get across the street, there was like just a sea of people, you know,
Yeah.
moving at the same time, trying to cross the streets and just hordes and
It's
hordes of people in the
amazing.
cities.
We we're
Really
actually kind of
remarkable experience.
yeah, I'm sure. And we're actually kind of creeping up toward where we should probably do my final five questions soon. But I wanted to ask you, I mean, while we're on the topic of being in communist China, you told us a lot of overview of the things that you saw there. Was there anything that happened to you or with your group or any experiences that stood out to you as, just incredible, funny, or even touching, or anything that
Oh,
happened
funny.
that,
Yes, I didn't tell you about, yeah, the food. Very strange. They took us one night to a family Chinese restaurant.
okay.
Huge. I mean, again, this was in Beijing. Very, very big. And you ate with a giant lazy Susan on the table, and they would have all different dishes, and you kind of spun it around,
Mm-hmm.
and you would take the soup and the rice or the noodles or the meat. But what the people were eating there, um, we asked, oh, well, it doesn't seem to be what we're eating. I said, looked a little different. And the local guide told us, well, yeah, they eat live mice. Like we heard this clicking. It sounded like
My.
click, click, click. And yeah, they eat live mice with the chopsticks. That's a delicacy.
Oh my.
And yes, their foods they served us an Americanized kind of version of the Chinese food. And for drinks, this was very unusual. Soda was very, very expensive. So a Coca-Cola could be maybe $6 or $8 if you tried to buy it off the street. But beer was cheap. So in China, they have a version of beer. They call it Chinese beer. And that's what they would always try to give us for lunch. They would bring out what looked to be like juice sized glasses, and they were all filled with beer. And they would put that all out on the table. But if you wanted water, and we were kind of leery about drinking water in most places, except the hotels. Or if you wanted water or soda, it was super expensive, but you could drink beer. That was free.
Oh gosh.
But again, the beer was in like a juice size 4-ounce glass, maybe, of beer. But we all thought that was very funny. The food in general was the food they served us was pretty good. The roads were okay. The roads weren't too bad. The biggest thing, of course, was the bathrooms and the culture. I enjoyed the opera. I enjoyed, and of course, the religious culture. We got to go to see some Buddhist temples. That was very interesting. Of course, we went to the Forbidden City. We visited all of that. That was very interesting.
But unlike,
We didn't see the warrior soldiers. That particular city wasn't on the shore, but we did see a lot because we went to the Lake District. We went to the religious shrines. We went to the parks. We saw all of those factories with the jade and the rugs and the silk and all of that. So I think it was a really good, informative tour. I'm sure if you went to China today, 20 years later, I'm sure everything is modernized and very
sure.
different. But of course, probably a lot more expensive too.
Mm-hmm. And nothing like compared to, of course, 50 years prior being in the Soviet or, Russia or those places. Nothing felt
No, nothing
scary or,
restrictive, except the fact that the government wouldn't allow a tour group to go to a restaurant unless it was approved. So I think that was more in terms of health standards than
okay.
anything else. Not so much that they didn't want you to mingle, more in terms of considering some of the kind of types of food they eat.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think it
Yeah, that
was
makes
more of
sense.
a health standard kind of thing that they wanted it to be inspected and approved by the government rather than just let you go anywhere.
Yeah. Geez, Barbara, I feel like there's still so many places that you've been that we didn't talk about. We didn't talk anything about the United States, but in the to be respective of time, I don't want
Well,
to go
I'm
too much.
working on that now because from all of my books, we visit all of those sites. So we're working our way around the states now.
Well, what we'll do then is we'll be in touch and we'll do this again maybe later in the year or somewhere down the road and we'll talk about your US travels. How's that?
Yeah, yeah, certainly we can do that.
Yeah, that sounds great. But I do have a final 5 questions that I ask everybody, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. And so and these answers don't have to be just the places that we've talked about today. So anywhere in the world that you've been, but not in your own home, where was your favorite meal you've ever had?
Italy, by
Okay.
far. The food in Italy is just fantastic. And I've been to Italy 4 times, 5 times.
Was there
So,
any one that
yeah.
stands out to you that one was just amazing?
A particular kind of food or a
A
place?
particular meal that you just remember vividly, like this, I'll never forget that dish, that experience.
A place in, I believe it was in Assisi. I had a vegetable pizza that was served on a board that was out of this world.
Excellent. Pizza in Italy is amazing.
But you can't have spaghetti and meatballs together. They're
Oh,
two separate courses.
yeah, you're
That
right.
really upset my husband. I want my spaghetti and meatballs.
Oh boy. Okay. This is a little oddball question, I think, to some people, but of all the and you probably have easier answers than some people. Of all the places that you have been in the world, where is there one place that if I said to you, Barbara, here's a free trip, all taken care of, and you would turn it down? I'm good. I don't want to go there again, or I don't need to go there again, whatever the case may be. Where would you not go again?
Topsco with the sand fleas. Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, flipping that on the other side, of all the places that you have gone in the world, where do you absolutely have to go again?
Absolutely have to go back. I probably would go back to Italy again, even though I've seen almost all of it, because I just love it. Probably, yeah, Italy.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I've been there a couple times and I don't go to most places more than once, but there's so much to see and it's just so beautiful. Okay. Where in the world have you not been that you absolutely have to go?
A lot of places. I want to go to the middle of the country. Specifically, I want to go to see the area in Kentucky and Illinois where Abraham Lincoln was born and lived.
Okay.
There is so much to see there. They have reconstructed a block in Springfield where he lived with his family for many years, and they have the whole block uh, and that recreated. It's actually the house that he lived in, and Then there is the place where he's buried. There's a museum there, and I'm very partial to Abraham Lincoln. I was even born on the same day he was born on, so he
Oh
is
gosh.
definitely one of my favorites. So that's one place. As far as an exotic place that I would love to go, I think I'd have to drag my husband tooth and nail because the flight is so long. I would love to go to Australia, particularly Brisbane,
Okay.
because that is such a beautiful place. I've seen travel videos of it. In one spot, you can have a major city, a tropical rainforest, and a beach, all within the city limits.
Wow. Yeah,
And
that's
I would
cool.
love to see that.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's good. That's a good choice. That's a good choice. And then the final question I have for you, Barbara, is what do you have lined up? I know you said you're working on the United States, so what do you have on your itinerary? Where are you going?
The next trip, I believe, is going to be that trip to Springfield, Illinois, and Kentucky. I may even do a book on that. I have a couple of things in mind for the United States. I also want to visit other places in the central part of the country that I haven't been to. So I would say maybe Kansas, Nebraska, or some of the national parks out there in the middle of the country. Probably some of those. I have a couple of books that are kind of midway in production. The next one is going to be Gettysburg, but just so many historical places to see. So I think there's going to be a lot that I'm going to be doing in this country for the time being.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I want to give you one last chance just in case anything popped into your mind while we were wrapping up or something that you thought of earlier that you were like, man, I have to tell this one story. Or is there anything we missed before we close things out?
Well, I think we pretty much got it all. Nothing pops into my head right now.
All right. That's okay. Like I said, we'll do it again sometime down the road. And I just want to say thank you for taking this time with me and with our listeners. I really enjoyed this. You've given us stories and perspective that no one else has on this show so far. And so this was really fascinating for me and I really enjoyed it.
So I enjoyed our conversation. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Barbara, and good luck with your books and good luck with what you do coming up traveling the US. And again, we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
And there's another episode of the Where Have You Been podcast in the books. Thank you so much for listening today. It was another great guest with some great stories, as always, and I hope that you will support all of the guests by checking out the show notes and going to their web pages, seeing any socials and projects that they may have going on. And please, again, I'll ask as always to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help to allow the podcast to grow and reach more people, and I appreciate you for doing that. Also, if you haven't done so, check out the website, whybpodcast.com, where you can find blog posts. If you'd like to be a guest, please register to be a guest on the site. And check out the merch page. There's some really cool stuff if you're interested in representing the pod, along with some other cool travel items and apparel that I'm working on every day as well. Join me again next week for another great guest with more incredible stories. New episodes drop every Sunday just after midnight Eastern Time. Until then, thank you for being here, and have a great day.